Hello and welcome in. This is our second conversation, talking about racism and sexism in sports broadcasting. So as we talk, let's first introduce ourselves so you know who you're talking with. Let's begin with Emma.
Hi, I am Emma Tiedemann, born and raised in Dallas, Texas, and have been broadcasting since I was 15 years old, and I'm currently in Portland, Maine as the voice of the would-be Portland Sea Dogs in 2020, but looking ahead to 2021 for the return of minor league baseball. But definitely happy to be a part of the conversation for another week.
Darius.
I'm Darius Thigpen, went to Ohio State where I was student broadcaster there. A couple of years of minor league baseball and 3 years at Longwood University in Farmville, Virginia, play-by-play, sports information, and now I'm in marketing.
Meghan.
I'm Meghan McPeak, originally from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and I am currently the voice of the Washington Mystics, who are down in the Wubble, as well as the voice of the Capital City Go-Go, which is the G League affiliate for the Washington Wizards, and currently living in D.C.
Chris.
Chris Lewis, originally from the Philadelphia area, South Jersey, now in Boise, Idaho, play-by-play for Boise State Athletics. Do women's basketball, some men's basketball, fill in football, kind of every different sport, and host some sports talk radio as well.
Jesse Goldberg-Strassler, originally from Maryland, just outside D.C. I do Lansing Lugnuts baseball and Central Michigan University women's basketball. All right, let's get into it. We begin with Meghan, what you said last week. I'll quote you directly. This is a conversation that needs to happen. Wording and phrasing matter in how we cover sports and the things that we say. And Darius, your very last thought, as we just gave concluding thoughts last week, was how we must be wary of assumptions. So to build off that, what do you mean?
So when it comes to assumptions, it's a number of different things that are layered in, but essentially what it comes to is word phrasing that can be built off of stereotypes. So whether it be a quarterback who's a black quarterback, oh, well, he's black, therefore he's a dual threat, where you look at and see some absolutely ridiculous examples, like with Jameis Winston. When he was coming out of high school, he was listed as a dual threat quarterback. Anyone who has seen Jameis Winston play quarterback, you know he's got cement in his cleats. He is not a fast runner. He's not a dual threat in any sense of the word. So just understanding how we depict our athletes, how we throw labels at them. And a lot of times it comes from just lazy analysis and not wanting to get to know the person, assigning a word or maybe a colloquialism, even times a euphemism when you're talking about someone. So I think it's very important that we dig deep into understanding who the athletes are, and we pay attention to how we talk about them, so that we don't lend into just throwing stereotypes across the board, because this has an impact. You'll see when it comes to scouting, those same tired phrases get thrown over and over again. All the way down to youth level. When you look at AAU basketball, you'll see a lot of times when you have a bunch of teams who are playing one another, and they're at a tournament, they don't know each other from all over the country. When the ball comes to a black player on the wing, that's a driver. Make them shoot. If it goes to the corner and it's a white kid, shooter. And these kinds of things that are just, they have no base. We perpetuate them at times. So as sports broadcasters, it's our point to, it's our task to articulate and make sure that people understand that those stereotypes have no kind of bound, and we can't feed into them. So that was really my point of making sure that we understand how our phrasing matters and the words that we say, how we depict our athletes matter.
Meghan, Chris, and Emma, what's been your experience with hearing assumptions in broadcasting?
I'll go here and I'll mention that it's funny because this is a chat of a lot of play-by-play announcers, but I do feel like what Darius is talking about is something that goes for sports broadcasting throughout, and I hear it a lot in sports talk radio as well, where you make assumptions and we almost build up a character based on what they look like versus what they actually have done. And you've mentioned, Jameis Winston is your guy. To me, the highlight example is always Byron Leftwich. Byron Leftwich was like the slowest quarterback in the NFL. Like, that dude, he wouldn't tell you he was fast. Nobody who played with him would tell you he was fast. Back at Marshall, I don't think he was very fast. But even he got a lot of the, mobile quarterback building, especially in his time in the NFL. And it was like, well, okay, what are we doing here? And then around draft time, you see a lot of this, whether it's based on language of, who's athletic or who's not, or certain character things like, the whispers around certain prospects and why they are falling versus or other prospects and who are rising. And you're wondering, okay, what is going into that besides just what you're seeing on the field? And if they start to mention a lot of these away from the field stuff, character concerns, like how much of that is based in reality and how much is that based on, in a way, stereotyping. And that's one of the things that I try to do a lot is not just a play-by-play announcer, but somebody who does have a voice on the radio. When I was doing a lot of shows around draft time, is like, let's just not repeat things just because one person said it and we have follow up on it.
I do think that broadcasters can fall into that trap in terms of that broadcasters can be regurgitators, that the coach says this, so they write down that quote and they take it forward. But there was a study done by James Rada from Ithaca College in 2005 that the farther that things went when players were talked about as people off the field, if the player was white, then the more that the player as a person was talked about, the more praise was given to them. But if the player was not white, that the more that the player as person was talked about, the more criticism was given to them.
Right, and I think you can take that onto the court or the field too. There's been other studies saying that broadcasters will focus on, the white players and give them praise for whatever, goal they scored or a, good offensive move. But then the extra criticism is applied to the non-white athletes for, just a misstep or they ran the wrong play or something, but they have a lot more negativity drawn to them versus the positives that seem to attribute to the white players too. So I think it's on multiple levels of, describing who they are off the field, but then also their play on the field too. It just kind of all meshes together as one's kind of more of that negativity and one's that positivity.
I think that also is, a mirror image of society. Point blank period. Like that is what society also deals with as, people that might be white, they get treated and are held to a certain standard. And then you have, minorities, whether it's Black people, Latino people, Asian people, they're held to a completely different standard. And for what? Because we all look different? Like that doesn't make sense. And I feel like, play on the field and how sports is handled is a mirror image, like I said, of society. And look at what we're dealing with right now in 2020 and what's going on in society in the United States of America and even Canada and quite frankly around the world. Every country is dealing with something different. You look at what's going on in Germany and in the Middle East. There's something going on in every part of the world, and I think sports also mirrors that as well. So it's interesting. And to Chris's point, when you think about when it's around draft time, my biggest pet peeve is you have a draft and a kid gets drafted and fun facts about that kid and something about a family member pops up that has to do with them overcoming a drug overdose. Why is that a fun fact about that child? Why are you now taking the best night of that kid's life to this point in their young career and making it about a family member overcoming a drug overdose? Why not make it just about him or her and their moment and give them their moment? Because now that is going to be part of their moment in a highlight clip for the rest of their life.
There was something to this too beyond the draft, where I saw a lot of reporters going into players' personal lives and saying, all right, tell your worst story in terms of dealing with racism, where players have been asked to really open up about painful moments from their background.
And I think that has a lot to do with who's telling the stories and who are the people in charge of telling these stories, and that's what they want to hear. And that comes from a lot of not having enough people of different backgrounds in the room in the first place. And I know that all you guys have mentioned about, what facts are told about specific individuals, whether it has to do with, race or gender or whatnot. But then you look at, okay, well, especially at the college level, where these towns are and who is the sports director at a lot of these places that are covering this college program, who the SIDs are at these college programs, and what their backgrounds are. They don't necessarily overlap with the backgrounds of a lot of the Black players. So how to best tell their story, who was there to guide that? Like that's one of the things that kind of I wonder about. And the more you go through, like, I don't even know that many Black SIDs. I don't know that many Black play-by-play announcers at this level, especially at the ones that are covering college programs. And if those are the people who are bringing out the stories, well, now you're recycling the same ideas that we've always had, and you're going to get those same type of stories that you always get, which don't always paint the most complete picture of Black and brown individuals, and they just kind of go with the story that they're familiar with.
Yeah, following up on that, Chris, I'll tell you a stat that I was blown away by when I found out just this last week. Jen Fry, she does talks. She does a lot for social justice within athletics, particularly at the college level. She presented a stat that 94% of sports information directors are white. I had no clue about that. I mean, I was an SID myself, and it's something that when you think about it, it really does have a big impact. Like you said, who controls the narrative? Because that's all that an SID does. You're the media contact. You are the PR person for this team. So it is your responsibility to gather the stories of the student athletes, to go and talk to the coaches, to understand who your people are, and then pitch it toward media. So it's not just looking at, oh, well, this is what story that ESPN or ABC or CBS put up. Well, it's also who's that mouthpiece for the team, for the university. And if there aren't any people of color in the room to pitch the stories, who know the stories, and if there aren't enough women, if there aren't enough people with diverse backgrounds, then of course you're going to have the same few stories, because when you have a lack of diverse opinions and diverse viewpoints, then yeah, you tend to slide back into, all right, well, what do we know? And then you look for the same thing. And it gets to be that, Jesse, to your point, a level of regurgitation, even as storytellers.
I think about the idea of interviews. If you're interviewing someone, and interviews are really, well, I'm not going to say it's a good way because it depends on the interview itself, but it's a way to get to know more about a person. But if the interviewee does not trust the interviewer, if the questions aren't right, if the setting isn't right, or the thing that I come back to too, if the transcription, how do you present somebody's words?
Yeah, I think when it comes to your point, Jesse, if the interviewer does not reflect the interviewee, most likely, especially with young kids, to Darius's point, the college kids, you're dealing with 18, 19, 20-year-olds. Immediately, for the most part, a wall is going to go up. They're going to be reluctant to give information because they're going to question that person's motive because they've experienced it in their life before, most likely. And I mean, when you think about the fact that a lot of these kids end up at the pro level specifically, they have been in the media and been in the public eye for, at least since the age of, 14, 15. If you look, LeBron, for example, even younger, the late Kobe Bryant, younger, because, coming right out of high school. So when you have that experience of always dealing with the media, always having people in your face asking questions, once you get burned once and your words get turned around, you're reluctant to then, you want to get that avoidance of getting burned the second time. And that's where I think, to Darius's point, the SIDs come into play hugely. Whether it is a white or black or brown or Asian, doesn't matter the color. Whoever the SID is at the school and is in charge of that portion, that person needs to do anything and everything in their power to make sure that they are the one person that every athlete can trust when it comes to dealing with the media. Because if I'm interviewing, a college kid, and this is hypothetical, it is not an experience I have had, so I just want to make that clear. If I'm interviewing a kid, and let's say she had, a rough upbringing, and I want to ask about that, I am going to do everything in my power to build a rapport and comfortability and trust level with that player so that when I do ask those questions, they feel like they can open up to me. And if I then take that and spin the words of what they said in the public eye, it's on the SID to have that player's back and say, whoa, 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 you need to actually take that back. I was in the interview. And I think at every possible point, SIDs need to be in every interview. I understand, it can be impossible at times, but when you have, a one-on-one interview with a big writer for, AP, WAPO, ABC, CBS, whatever it may be, when it's a big time, commodity of the media, the SID and or the coach need to be in that interview so that they can, we're not going to talk about that. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I need to go over that answer with them because they're 18 and 19-year-old kids. They are going to say what pops into their head. They're not trained with the media the way pro athletes are. So I think when it comes to the college level, there needs to be someone that the kids can trust. They have to trust at least one person when it comes to dealing with the media, and that's on the SID.
Chris.
You're muted.
Yes, I am. I'm not. But to ask you a question, Megan, and also Darius, because you guys have the SID experience, I've talked to athletes in the past, and like some of the things that they've mentioned to me has been things like, well, they're kind of afraid to tell what their story is because maybe their story could make a coach look bad or make a former high school coach look bad or make the program look bad in some way because of something that happened or make the town, because let's be real, a lot of these colleges, a lot of these universities are in a majority white, not very diverse group, and they're afraid to really say something that could be considered divisive. So for you, Megan and Darius as well, like how do you kind of manage that too?
I think that comes to having the conversation, like to Darius's point earlier, when the kids are coming in as an SID, again, to be clear, I was never an SID. I'm just taking it from an interviewer standpoint. I would expect that the SID probably knows everything when it comes to the background of the children. That should be part of their job. That should be part of your role, is to know the background of these kids coming in so that if it does come up in an interview, you know how to handle it. You can instruct the player on how to handle it. That's why typically I know when I have had to interview or made requests to interview college players, the SID that I've come in contact with has requested the questions beforehand so they can know what's going to be asked. They can then assist in prepping the player for those questions. But again, that's on the program. That's on the SID to take that into their role and part of their job and make sure that they're also taking care and protecting the player. Because if you know that there's a story or an experience that a player may have that could make someone or something look bad, if you know ahead of time that it's going to pop up in an interview, you can prep that player on how to quote unquote spin it from to turn the negative into a positive and say, I went through this experience, but this is how I looked at it as a learning point in my life. That's part of being PR. That's part of being in that role of the PR team, and also part of marketing the players to take negative things or not so good things and make them have a positive outcome.
Yeah, it's always an interesting thing being an SID. It depends on which school you're at. For me, at a smaller school, we had 4 SIDs, including one student who had just recently graduated who was an intern. But of course, you know how the hours of interns go for if you're working in sports. So it's a precarious thing because you have at a smaller school, 13 sports, 14, 15 sports, and then a staff of 3 full-time and 4 total to be responsible for all of them. So you're not always going to have a case where the SID knows the full background and every intricate detail for the student athletes, but at the very least, having a staff who is able to understand them as people. Because if you're just looking at it like, all right, well, these are my students, student athletes, and you have some warped perception of what it means to be an athlete, thinking, oh, well, these are just God's gift to earth. They don't care about anyone or anything. They're arrogant or whatever it may be. And that is your thought about someone who you're supposed to be protecting, to make sure that they don't go off the rails and say anything crazy. Well, of course, you're going to have people who don't fully do their job the way that it's intended to do, exactly as Meghan outlined. Because, I mean, for me personally, as a journalism undergrad, I don't love the idea of, yeah, you can have the questions in advance. Yeah, I need the questions in advance. Yeah, but at the same time, as an SID, it's your job to make sure student athletes are taken care of. You make sure you're protecting the university, the image, the brand, all of these things. So it's incumbent upon the SIDs more than anything else just to understand what it means to be a student athlete. And I mean, when you don't have that first step of, well, I kind of understand what it is to walk in your shoes, yeah, you can have a huge disconnect, and it can lead to some disasters, to be completely honest. Thankfully, I've never been a part of that, but I mean, you can see easily how it would happen.
Tell you a quick story of answers the questions in advance, and to build off what Meghan was saying, because it's so important. Speaking now from media relations in minor league baseball, we have 18, 19-year-old players from the Dominican Republic, from Venezuela, from Cuba, from Mexico, from wherever, who do not speak English or who are working on learning English. So it's incumbent on me from the first time that I meet them, and then sitting in on their English class, working on my Spanish to show that I'm crossing. They have so many teammates who don't put in the work, or their coaches who don't put in the work. And if I am going to get them to trust me and I'm going to trust them, then we have to work on building that trust together. With a player who spoke only Portuguese this past year. So it's upon me to learn Portuguese at the same time that he's learning English. So I sit in on their English class. I give them an interview that I'm going to do with them in English, all the questions about who they are as people, and then they can work on how they would answer those in English. We work on that interview together, and suddenly I can give that interview to the coaches where their teammates can listen to it, because their coaches don't really know what they're like as people. All they know is that this guy can really hit a curveball. So the language barrier in baseball is just enormously significant.
I can speak to that too. I mean, it's insane of, how little English your leadoff hitter can know. And, you get media requests for these guys who, they're like, oh, can I talk to him tonight? It's like, no, actually, because those players too, they're uprooted from their home countries with their home languages, their food, their families, their friends, that little things that they grew up with, and they come to a brand new country with people that don't look like them, trying to play this game. And it's just crazy to kind of put yourself in their shoes. And you're right. You kind of have, as the media relations point of contact, you do have to kind of be the SID for them. It's look out for them and, get those interviews ahead of time. And it kind of warms your heart by the time the end of the season is over. Their English is so good that you don't have to, give them that ahead of time, because they want the challenge of talking to a journalist for the first time. So yeah, I think it's a whole other world here, and, you do have to kind of watch their back for them.
Unmute, Chris.
I gotta get better at this. I don't know why I keep messing up like this. Anyway, race, gender, there are a couple of and then language. There are some of the main barriers to viewing other people as human. Like, that's just how it has kind of been. And the more you can sort of bridge the gap of, having a more diverse group of people that the more that you're around people who aren't your same gender and have shown that you can treat them very well, and the more that you can be around people of different languages, that all goes into humanity. And the less that you have of that within the people who are telling the stories, the more of a chance that you'll have what seems to be an annual thing, especially in baseball, of the story of the old white baseball writer saying something that's very insensitive towards the Latin baseball player. That happens quite a bit. Or the sports talk radio host in the town, the white sports talk radio host, saying something that's completely offensive to the black basketball player. So women's basketball, Meghan, you can speak towards more of the different negative experiences that the media has brought upon the players, but there's plenty of examples. Don Imus is the most famous one, with the nappy-headed, you know what, I don't need to say the rest. That's what happens when you have those barriers that I mentioned, the three that I brought up, but you do, as a media, as a person in charge, you do nothing about bridging those gaps.
I think too, the way that players are portrayed in media is so much based upon, and to get back to the interview, but if you see a guy talking, or if you see that press conference, we get this whole shaping of this guy is sullen, or this guy is funny, or look at this type of personality, and none of whatever that public persona might have anything to do with it. I come back to Darius, what you said with the assumptions, that if that sports writer, Chris, doesn't actually talk to that player, and the two of them get on the same page and they can ask them questions about who they are, then they're just talking from however many miles away about their preconceived biases. Meghan, I want to go back to what you said in terms of the wording and phrasing matters. So with Darius, he immediately went to assumptions. Was there something else that comes to mind for you in terms of how wording and phrasing matters?
I mean, when I hopped on the call, I said, hey guys, and Emma's on, and I immediately, my fault, and gal. And I think that's just how, you know, we grow up in society. It's like we say, hey guys, as if we're saying, hey folks. Like we treat it the same way. And that's something that I myself, I'm not perfect. So I'll try and catch myself if I can, things like that. And I don't know if you guys have seen it. If not, I think it would be a great listen. LaChina Robinson on her Around the Rim pod with Angel McCautry. They touched on the Andre Iguodala, Aerial Powers situation. And, you know, Angel had a great example of, in the Olympics, she did a 360 layup, and the caption of the video that was viewed over 1 million times was, girl does 360 layup. No, she is a multi-time All-Star. She is an Olympian. She is a fantastic basketball player. Her name is Angel McCautry. It's not girl. So I think that is where a lot of women's sports deals with it. And, you know, even to her own point, she's not a girl. She is a woman. Like, hello. At the age of what? Like, I think for myself, I stopped referring to women as girls when they hit like 15. At that point, like, you're 15, most likely have, you know, gone through puberty. Sorry guys to take it there, but that's the reality of life. You know, you hit 15, I think you can be called, I mean, maybe, you know, young lady or young woman, but you're not a girl. So why do we treat women's professional sports that way? Why do we say girls basketball? Or, you know, we call them professional male athletes. Why are the women not treated the same way in every single sport? At the end of the day, they are women playing professional sports. So I think that's one of the, you know, areas that we have to catch ourselves on, and just little things that in everyday speak, we use terms and words, and we just have to be more cognizant of how we're speaking to people. And it's not even just in sports. It's just flat out talking to humans, period. And I think, you know, to Chris's point, the one that sticks out in my head is, I can't recall his name at this moment, but formerly, because he was subsequently let go, the TV broadcaster for the Oklahoma City Thunder, when he said Russell Westbrook was playing out of his cotton-picking mind. I was watching that game live and stopped breathing dead in my tracks when I heard those words come out of his mouth. And I was watching with my mom, who is Caucasian, and I said, he's going to be in so much trouble, and I will not be shocked if he gets fired for this. And within a week, OKC had announced that he was no longer their TV person. Like, come on, seriously? And then there was another player who was, you know, they related him to a monkey while playing. Like, yeah. For what reason?
I mean, last year, San Francisco 49ers, Tim Ryan with Lamar Jackson.
Lamar Jackson's its own case of, we could go into like a whole paper on Lamar Jackson and how he got treated over his whole, he's only been in the NFL, what, 3 years? And he's kind of dealt with the whole media craziness that can go on for somebody who like doesn't hide his blackness. You know, he doesn't try to in interviews be something that he isn't. And when you're that authentic in that space, especially with the NFL and how their image usually is with quarterbacks, and that's going to be the interesting thing about the NFL over this next cycle is that like most of the young great quarterbacks are black, and how what is usually the management, the golden boy position, what the league wants to sell, the Bradys, the Mannings, the Montana, like go down the line. Well, the next gen is the Mahomes, it's the Jackson, Russell Wilson's still in his prime, and was like
Cam Newton.
Cam Newton is now with New England, which is wild. So, like, I'm just interested to see how this is navigated because the quarterback in the NFL has been its own thing for such a long time. And now that position is starting to look like a lot of what other athletics looks like, that's going to be interesting to see how people handle that.
We're unfortunately out of time. Any final thoughts?
I just think going back to what I was saying with just, you know, the little things that we say on an everyday basis, just take that extra moment and pause and think about what you're going to actually have come out of your mouth. You know, as broadcasters, we're taught when you're on air, don't say because it makes you look like you're not putting your thoughts together. Take that moment to pause and then say what you want to say instead of putting an in between your thoughts and your sentences. Treat that in everyday life. Don't say Think before you actually speak.
Think before you speak. Don't be afraid to go in and learn something. No one's perfect. We're going to keep learning and keep growing every single day. So don't think just because, I got it wrong this one time, I'm a terrible person. No, that's not the case whatsoever. We all have room to grow, clearly. I know for me.
Thank you to everybody.